and welcome to Allie's Anime Club.
Goodbye. You're not welcome to Allie's Anime Club.
Are you just going to say the opposite of everything that I say?
I mean,
uh, anyway, I'm Allee. As always, this is my co-host, Chris,
yeah.
and our guest, Orion.
Hi, everybody. I'm Orian Senji, and I'm here as a guest as we talk more about Dungeon Meshi.
So, this batch of episodes, what was it?
19 to 24.
19 to 24.
What was it?
Yeah. Probably the best batch of episodes so far, in my opinion.
We got cats. We got dogs. We got man-eating plants that turn into sheep.
We got dogs who are cats.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and the whole,
we got Senshi's backstory.
yes. And, the whole thing about the changeling mushrooms, right?
Yeah.
And the whole thing about the hippogriff versus, what was it? Griffin, right?
Right.
And that whole kind of almost a horror theme of Senshi being afraid that he had been fed dwarf, that he had eaten dwarf.
Right. He wasn't actually afraid of being killed by the griffin. He was afraid of killing and eating the griffin because then he would find out if he had eaten a person.
Mm-hmm.
These are two mythical creatures of which I have also always placed together in my head as being the same thing, and didn't know the difference until that episode.
Mm-hmm.
Also never looked into it, but one was a horse, one was a lion body. Is that what it was?
Something like that.
Yeah. So a hippogriff is usually like a horse with bird features, and a griffin has a eagle front part and a lion back part.
Mm-hmm.
But in this in Dungeon Meshi, apparently it's literally just a difference between the back parts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That whole thing. But we spent before we got to that whole thing, the whole thing with exploring who Izutsumi was interesting.
Yes. I absolutely love Izutsumi's introduction because you can immediately tell how you were saying in the last episode, you were wondering if Izutsumi was just mean because people had treated her badly in the past, and that becomes immediately apparent because she's threatening them for food and they just give her food, and then while they're in danger, even Senshi is taking the time to teach her how to hold a spoon.
Yes.
And and she's just people are actually going out of their way to help me.
Yeah.
So maybe I should be nicer to them.
They did kind of strike me as a bit of a snot-nosed punk.
Right. She's very clearly somebody who is not used to experiencing love, and she immediately meets these people who are actually friends and help each other and help other people, and she's wait, this is nice.
Yeah.
Maybe this is nice, actually.
And then when you see the flashbacks to when she was living with Shuro's people, you see that like they were abrasive towards her and she was abrasive back at them. She was a brat to them because they were trying to like not quite exploit her, but like get a lot of use out of her, I guess.
Right.
And she just thought that's how the world works. They're trying to use me. I'm trying to use them.
I think we also get kind of this idea that beastmen, at least in the East, are considered like second-class citizens,
Mm-hmm.
and just kind of like hated for being who they are.
Yeah.
And especially like there's that scene in the sauna episode where she's like taking off her clothes in front of everybody, and she's like, who would want to see a beastman naked?
Mm-hmm.
Like she that's how little she like considers herself, and like it's very it feels like a trans allegory, honestly. Like she's been taught for most of her life that like her body is undesirable, that she is like ugly and bad, and like part of her character arc is learning to accept herself. And it just feels like, you know, anybody, especially like body types that are very like ostracized from society, I think could really relate to Izutsumi.
And I think there's kind of like multiple layers to that, and I don't fully like. I'm not sure if I can fully speak on, because like in episode 19, it talks about how she was an artificially created beast man. Like this isn't even her natural body.
Mm-hmm.
Someone did that to her, and I don't know. I feel like there's a lot to unpack there.
Does that mean? Yeah, and they covered that whole thing was another type of ancient magic. So that means there are still practitioners of that just around. I don't think we'd previously gotten any sort of like, you know, reference to that still being a thing, rather than it just being something that used to be a thing. But you know, she's pretty young, so whoever's doing that still around. She's obviously from that other section of the world. So it was a far and wide thing and just still about. Maybe one day we'll figure out who actually did it and there'll be some storyline behind that.
Yeah, part of me wonders like what happened that led up to like how old was she? Because you're like you said, she is very young. How old was she when she was turned into an artificial beast person? And was there a reason? Like is this like some old, evil, mage in the woods that's cursing children or something? Like some kind of a wicked fairy tale. Uh, or is this like some kind of a thing where maybe her parents made a deal or something and that she's dealing with the consequences?
Heck, it could even be like some sort of trap thing, like how the mimic mushrooms work.
Yeah. Ooh, that actually brings up an interesting concept. If there was ancient magic traps that maybe were left from some ancient war like landmines.
That'd be wild, yeah. I don't know how far this anime is gonna go. I've never read the manga or anything like that, but it'd be interesting to get a little bit more lore about the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, we also see a little bit of that with Shuro going back to tell the Island Lord about what's happening in the dungeon and all of the elves.
That whole fucking scene was just, man, it was just like every stereotype there for just a bad guy. was in that room.
Yeah.
And then later on, when they're at what was it? 19's the last episode there was there. What they're them following down the the kid that wants to be the island lord and whatnot, following him down. It was just like a JoJo scene. I could almost hear the friggin'
Yeah.
music as it showed the elves coming behind them.
Oh yeah, in 24, yeah.
Yep, 24. That's what it was.
Yeah. That was interesting. The whole thing, like, with Kabru trying to help and then arguably making things worse. Though we get some more of Kabru's backstory and understanding more of like why he is the way he is, which is interesting. A little bizarre, but interesting.
He's a strange guy.
Yeah. But it talks about, like, Kabru's backstory does some interesting world building because it talks about how dungeons interact with the rest of the world. The whole thing where Kabru lived in a village that had a dungeon connected to it. The elves came out, cleared the dungeon. All the monsters fled the dungeon to get away from the elves and flooded into the town and killed everybody.
And and then like even the ones that had survived, without there being a dungeon there's not exactly an economy based on all the stuff you would sell that comes from a dungeon.
Right.
Right. So like even the people who survived can't really like settle back in because there's no resources there anymore.
Right. And then like he said that he got taken in by the elves, so he said he was raised for a number of years in the elvish community. So then it's like he was living as an outsider from a young age, being raised by the elves. So that probably did a lot of stuff to like shape his worldview.
Right. That might be why he's kind of a sociopath.
Yeah, kinda. He's got that skewed perspective on things because of how he was raised and like the situations he was raised in.
Really came from basically came from a coal mining town that had the coal mine die.
Yeah. Except all the coal came and set the town on fire.
Yeah, exactly. We have something like that in Washington State. So is that our state? Has Centralia, the friggin' mine, got lit on fire and is still burning? It's been burning for like 30 years or something, or 40 years.
Oh,
you don't know about that?
I heard about that. I don't remember if it was in Washington.
Pretty sure, yeah, it's over by Centralia. There's some mine that's been burning for a certain number of years. Since 1962, yeah. It was it's in Pennsylvania, actually. Way off.
Pennsylvania.
Way off. But in any case, it's been burning since the 60s. It still is.
Yeah.
Though I noticed something interesting in episode 20. There was the one with the sauna and the ice golem and all of that. That one was the first episode in a while that I heard them do an outro speech. And like in some of the previous episodes, it was like there was an outro speech almost every episode. And then episode 20 was like, I heard it. I was like, wait a minute, we haven't had one of those in a while.
Right. I forgot about that.
Part of me wondered, like, was the place I was watching it cutting it off? Or did that just not happen on some episode?
It hadn't happened for a while.
Yeah, I remember when the voice of the narrator came in, and then I'm like, what? Who's talking? And then I was like, oh, wait, this is the narrator. I forgot that existed in this show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, those ending narrations are from the manga. And just, like, sometimes there was no narration. Or I guess they like didn't feel it was necessary to keep the narration.
Delicious in dungeon.
Delicious in dungeon.
Yeah. I didn't go back and check this, but episode 21 I noticed that Izutumi was in the opening, and I could have sworn at previously Izutumi wasn't in the opening, and the opening
Yes.
didn't look that much different. It was like the same scenes except Izutumi was in them now.
Yes.
I did notice that as well, but I wasn't 100% sure if I'd noticed that or if I just missed her the first time.
Yeah, so you in the first the first 6 episodes and then 7 through 12 had different openings.
Mm-hmm.
And this time cuz they seem to change the opening every 6 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very helpful for how we do things.
Mm-hmm.
But the only thing that they changed for the intro this time was just adding Izutsumi, which is very funny to me.
I bet somebody's got a YouTube video out there with this side by side.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have to look that up later.
Yeah.
I enjoy also how Izutsumi sleeps with the group, where she just sleeps on top of people.
Yes.
Cat behavior.
Speaking of cat behavior, when they went to the Golden City and Izutumi was affected by the spell there that made the monsters docile and was like super cuddly to Marcel.
Yeah. And then and then she got out and she was like, "What did I do? Oh my god."
At first she was just like really groggy. She was like, "What in the world?" And then like her eyes just bugged out and you saw all of her memories of everything she did just flashed in her mind and she was just like,
I love that whole Golden City area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Minotaurs are a bit freaky.
There's the part where Laos comes into the room and goes, "I got to milk a minotaur." And Chiltruck is like, "Great, keep that to yourself."
Honestly, fantastic. Oh, and the fucking fashion.
Oh yeah.
Them trying out their outfits, they're like, "Oh, well, how different can they be?" And it's like modern art fashion clothing with gigantic pointy shoulders.
And I thought it was interesting that they said the sword, Kensuke, of all things, was what marked Laios as the predestined person to conquer the dungeon.
Just a casual
that's...
sword inside the dungeon that you could pick up. Anyone could.
Well, no, because remember, that sword was only on the boss armor.
Right, and it's a monster.
I don't think anyone mentioned the
itself.
Monster. Was that in any of the little pictures they showed?
The prophecy or whatever wasn't that the sword was a monster. It was that it was that sword. But the fact that it is a monster means pretty much no one else but Laios would be carrying it around.
Yeah, and the what's interesting is also the mollusks that make up the living armor. Somehow they know how to make armor and weapons, and they know how to mimic humanoid shapes and movements and body purposes, right?
Right.
And they grew, like they grow their shells, they grew the armor. So Kensuke made that sword. The monster made that sword, and the crest is that marks it as that sword is the crest of the winged lion, which is the guardian of the Golden City.
Right.
See, I was under the impression when he got the sword that the swords weren't part of the whole mollusk thing that was going on with the suits of armor. I just assumed it was a sword, and then what that Kensuke got inside of it, and that was just his home now. I didn't figure that he was the one that made it, or it's a non-gendered friggin' goop monster. But you know what I mean.
Well, actually, that's one of the things that got me was because they said that they were like mollusks. And so I did
Right.
research. I'm like, okay, where do, like, they were like the clams. I'm like, well, where do clam shells come from? And I found out clams make their own shells.
Right.
Okay, so yeah. So if I'd known that, I would have known that it made the sword. I just figured they were more like hermit crabs. Outside of the
No.
actual armor part. I figured they shared both of those properties. Like I know they
No,
talk
yeah,
about 'em like
mollusks.
clams, but
Mollusks make their own shells generally, and then hermit crabs take those shells.
Yes, hermit crabs. I think hermit crabs eat the mollusk and then take the shells, right?
something
Yep.
like that. Sea snails and stuff too.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so that was one of the things that got me was that like this sword, this shape sword, this design could only have been created by a monster inside the dungeon, where that imagery is prominent because Laios has lived in the town for how long and has never heard of the winged lion, and Laios knows all of the monsters.
Right.
What the heck is the deal with the little mushroom circle turning friggin' Kensuke into some weird like MMO demon sword?
That was very funny.
It's like maybe I could just keep it like this.
Towards the end of episode 24, whenever Marcel sees the sword, and she's like, "Why is your sword not in its sheath? Why is it all wrapped up?" He's like, "Oh, no reason." She's like, "Show me the sword." No, you don't have to. Show me the sword. and they have him like kneeling down as they're all standing around him, and Marcel's like, "What are we gonna do with you?" And Izutsumi's like, "I vote we form a circle and kick his ass."
Man couldn't help it. He liked the sword. He thought it looked cool.
And you saw
Yeah.
the mushrooms were growing out of the sword. They'd taken root. And
I more gushing about Izutsumi. I love that Izutsumi is actually does cat things and isn't just like a nya nya uwu cat girl.
Fate ReZero.
And she's actually like cat like.
super picky about her food.
Yeah. And also, kind of standoffish until someone shows her love, and then she begrudgingly she's very like shelter cat in that way.
Mm-hmm.
My cat is not a shelter cat. I got her when she was a kitten.
Aww.
As opposed to this cat, to Felix from
Yeah.
ReZero, which is just nya cat person.
Yeah.
Though I did think, the whole thing where they could only get to the Golden City, that pocket dimension or whatever, via ghost travel.
Yeah.
And I had a passing thought that I'm like, if more people become able to communicate with the ghosts in the dungeon, right? I'm imagining a situation where ghost travel becomes the new fast travel in the dungeon.
I fucking love that ghost after he said that. Oh yeah, I could see it. It was like, you asshole. I've been trying to talk to you for a week.
And I think it also,
He's like, I didn't know if I was hallucinating.
which kind of I find is really silly because Laios mentioned that his sister Fallon had the ability to communicate with ghosts and interact with ghosts. And
Right.
then it just never occurred to him that he could have that ability too.
Right. So
We're talking about Laios here.
It's probably
Yeah.
it's probably like a family thing.
Right.
I love Laios.
He wants to conquer the dungeon for no other reason than to save his sister.
Yep. And if you think about it, that kind of makes him a better candidate to be the king
Mhm.
because like he doesn't want the power.
Right.
He just wants to help people.
And he wants to learn more about monsters.
Right.
Though the whole thing with the summons in episode 22.
Uh-huh.
And I think someone shared in the Discord that meme
Oh yeah.
of the Shikanoko Noko
Yep.
of Laios's face whenever he sees the summons. And I don't care what Laios says, those summons are adorable.
I love those things. They're the goofiest, dumbest looking little happy guys. I like them.
And the fact they were made like not just out of meat, but like they're like, what about vegetables? She's like, I guess it's all calories. Throw it in. And then Laios got to like flex his monster skills, his monster knowledge, to like shape them like clay in order to make them more effective for the second one. But then the third one was just like, it looked so. It was just like a long thing with wings.
It's a worm with 6 wings or something.
And
yeah,
like,
because all it needed to be was fast.
right. And then at the end, like that face that I shared that I thought was like the best face I'd seen from Marcel was like, you see Marcel one moment like holding the limp body of the summon is like, you taught me so much. Thank you for your service.
And then
I
they
will always
fucking
treasure.
ate it.
Yes.
And then they ate it.
The next scene is Laios just cutting it apart.
Oh my goodness. Now we got
Laios is like,
we know what the inside of a sausage looks like now.
well, Laios is like, look, it's packed the meat and the vegetables. It's like some kind of a meat and vegetable sausage.
Yeah.
And she's just like, I don't know what I expected. Because they used all their food to make the summons, so they have to eat the food. They have to eat the summons.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly.
I felt bad for her.
Yeah.
I like somebody was like analyzing Elf Senshi's like behavior and movements and being like, yeah, this all makes sense because like he's like touching his face and like doing these poses. It's because he's used to like stroking his beard when he's thinking. And instead, he's like, he doesn't know what to do with his hands, so he's just like, it just looks like he's voguing.
I also think that like Senshi was kind of like living it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Because he became whatever his exaggerated understanding of an elf was, and he was just being the most elfish elf that you could elf.
Right.
Really a character I would play in an RPG. I'm just saying.
I like the part where he touches something hot and he's like, "Ow, oh, that's hot. Wait."
Because he's used to having the thick skin and the durability of a dwarf, where like it takes a lot for him to feel hot.
I did like the dissection of like how the races differ with Laios being a dwarf and being like, yeah, look how much power I got, but man, I'd tire out kind of quickly.
And he's like, hey, that's why Senshi must want to settle down to eat so often, is because...
And human Chilchuck was just so tired looking.
Yeah. It's funny because like you get the feeling that like that's just what he would look like if he didn't have like the half-foot like baby face all the time.
It really
like
is.
he would look like a fucking like alcoholic father because that's what he is.
We finally got the thing where he admitted that he was married and had kids, and he's like when he's like, this is my story, what is your story, Senshi? But there was also something interesting when they were exploring Senshi's backstory a little bit, when they said this dungeon was only discovered 6 years ago. And
right.
The upper floors and so much of this dungeon has already been stripped so bare.
Yeah. Because it seems like this is a world where like dungeons are kind of like gold rush towns.
Mm-hmm.
Where like they'll go in and they'll immediately just like strip the place bare as soon as they can, and then as soon as there's nothing valuable left, they just pack up and leave. That's why you have so many like ghost towns in the Midwest.
You got a couple of different towns like that in California and stuff too, in the mountains.
Yeah. Just like, places that people just took everything valuable and didn't really think about sustainability and just left everything.
And then you have the orcs that are just trying to live in the dungeon and use it as a defensible place for them to exist.
Right.
And you have all the other people who can't who like are rejected by the surface and are just trying to live in the dungeon. They're not trying to take treasure. They're trying to be a part of the dungeon.
Right.
And live sustainably.
The next
and I think part of like especially Fallen and Marcel's backstories is like finding ways to live with dungeons sustainably instead of, doing what people have been doing, which is just like taking everything that isn't nailed down and then leaving when everything dries up. Which I think is like also an environmental message, like that you can map directly onto real life.
Living in a house that rebuilds itself might be kind of nice.
Yeah.
Cleans up all your stuff you spill on the floor. You just have to make sure you keep the tables from being eaten. Assuming they didn't come with tables.
Yeah, it eats anything that isn't that didn't come with the dungeon.
Yep.
Though also speaking of world building, and like world stuff, the whole thing with the technology where they found that kind of like steampunky stuff with the gears and the pipes, and it's like they were during the war they were developing all this tech. I think they said it was the elves and the dwarves.
Yep.
Yeah.
Were developing all this like advanced technology, and then after the war, they all agreed no one gets technology anymore.
Yeah.
No technology for you.
Too dangerous. Somebody made a nuke somewhere.
Yeah, it's a good like explanation as to why like things are still medieval technology, because like a lot of times in fantasy worlds it's just like, yeah, this place has been locked in like medieval era technology for 2,000 years, and like that's not really.
Dungeon Meshi's done a great job of just making it so there's a lot of background explaining things that you normally don't think about.
Right, exactly. And that's like one of the things that I absolutely love about Dungeon Meshi is that it just like all of this world building stuff that you kind of just take for granted in fantasy worlds, it all gets explained and it all makes sense.
Yeah.
One of those elves is gonna have a friggin' gun. I'm just saying.
They see some old veteran elf that fought in the war that refused to get rid of his guns.
It's ancient magic.
Yeah. I might be out of spells, but I'm not out of options. So there's that. And then like towards the end in episode 24, when they're on the trolley thing, right? And Senshi shares his idea about we need to find Fallon, we need to eat Fallon, and then revive her a normal way without dragon flesh. It makes sense.
Made me a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. But it could be interesting to see because they're talking about needing another mid-sized party, right? And then are they going to get the elves in on the meal too? And then at the end when there was the interaction with the Mad Mage and Fallon, the Mad Mage is a big meanie. He wouldn't let Fallon eat the mushroom.
Yeah.
Wouldn't let Fallon. I think it was a walking mushroom or something that she caught.
Yeah.
Wouldn't let her eat it. I'm like, why is he so mean? Like, what?
She just wants to eat.
If there's anyone in this anime that needs to have a friggin' nap, it's Thistle.
Yeah.
The Mad Mage, yeah. That guy's got some eye bags.
I can't believe you actually remembered the name of that character.
I didn't even remember the name.
It's a cute name.
You can't remember the name of any other character except for Thistle.
Hey, I remember Senshi.
Speaking of Thistle,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like Thistle is something coded, but I don't know what it is. The whole thing where like he is completely and utterly opposed to change. He refuses to consider the possibility of life without his closest friends, and is completely and utterly dead set on making sure he and all the people he care about get to spend forever together with nothing changing and no change to his routine or life whatsoever.
Right.
Trauma, I guess, from his friend the king dying?
Well,
Yeah.
if you remember, the king was alive in the Golden Kingdom till the king fled to try to get people to come rescue them.
Right.
Right.
So what happened before then? Oh, you know what? I bet I know what it's connected to. Just straight off the top of my head. They had the whole assassination attempt thing when Laios was in the paintings. Maybe that's what like made that switch flip in Thistle's head. Where he was at that banquet when they're doing coronation or something.
Yeah, so there was an assassination attempt, and so maybe Thistle was like, "Oh, if nothing changes and nobody can get in or out, then everyone will be safe, and nobody will be able to be assassinated."
That's why he's got to read all those scrolls.
I don't know. Like, I know for me, I don't like change. I'm not a big fan of like sudden changes to my lifestyle and my situation. So I can kind of like understand wanting things to be stable. But like Thistle just takes it to this like extreme level.
How much of the dungeon is Thistle's own creation? Because, we got the dungeon cleaners or whatever. Like, were they a Thistle creation? Because they kind of fit the motives.
I think possibly, but also it seems like dungeon cleaners are a thing in every dungeon. So I think maybe like there's some process that Thistle used to turn the area into a dungeon.
I don't think we've learned how dungeons are created yet, have we?
Yeah.
Well, they've touched on it a little bit in the last batch of episodes where when Fallon and Marcel were in school and they learned about how you have the layers of dirt and you have to infuse the dirt with magic spirits in order to and put enough magic spirits together that they start feeding off of each other, and then they made little dungeons in jars.
Right.
Huh.
And then that started to turn into a little mini dungeon. So I'm wondering if it's some kind of a spell where if you infuse a enclosed area with enough magic and it is the right size and shape that it turns into a dungeon. So then maybe things like dungeon cleaners and these and monsters and things either are generated or born as part of the spell, or maybe they migrate into the dungeon.
Right.
The elves knew a whole lot about dungeons and are also very picky and like, oh, if it gets too strong, you got to handle it type thing. So maybe they're partially responsible in their whole war with the dwarves and things for this whole dungeon stuff.
Yeah, it could be that like they were the original like people who figured out how to make dungeons.
Maybe they dungeoned a dwarf home.
And then like that those dungeons got out of hand and started to threaten the world, and so now they have a very extreme response to any dungeons that get out of hand.
But also, if you look at how the elves respond to the dungeons, right? Like that kind of adds up with like what you're saying about like maybe they're partially responsible with the creation of dungeons, and so they overreact in response to dungeons, right? But like
Right.
their reaction to exterminate the dungeon to drive out enough stuff that it ceases to be a dungeon anymore, right? Causes so much collateral damage to the surrounding area. And like I don't know, it just seems so destructive. And I think that might be part of like I don't know if it's a message or an idea like you see with the main party where like Laios is the kind of person that like if he becomes the king of the dungeon, he's not going to exterminate the dungeon, he's not going to expand the dungeon. He's probably going to work to create a stability in the dungeon so that way it can continue to be a boon for the surrounding area.
Sell Minotaur
Right.
milk. I feel like the elves are kind of bad guy coded. I'm gonna be honest here. You know, they're
Oh,
bad
yeah,
guy coded. I've
definitely.
been clear about that. I think that at least.
Mhm.
So like, if I were to give them the benefit of the doubt, it's probably worry about like whatever might have happened in the past, or if I don't give them the benefit of the doubt, maybe they're just scared of what someone might do with the dungeon if they let it keep going. But you mentioned the collateral, and there is a lot of collateral. So either they don't care about the collateral because whatever they're preventing is important enough that the collateral's still not as bad, or it's a selfish reason and the collateral doesn't matter because if someone gets a hold of the dungeon, they could be a possible threat.
Right. Yeah,
Actually,
it could be that like they want to stop somebody from becoming the king of the dungeon so that they don't become a threat.
now that you mention it, like the idea talking about someone becoming king of the dungeon being a threat, right? And the idea that like someone like the Mad Mage has dominance over all the creatures in the dungeon, right? All and if the dungeon generates those creatures because there's enough magic infused in the dungeon that these creatures are just born from the dungeon almost like maybe not eternally, but like there is a number of creatures that are born from the dungeon. Someone becoming master of the dungeon could raise an army of monsters at their beck and call
Right.
and then take them out of the dungeon to do all kinds of conquering.
Right.
Well, there's a lot of information we're missing there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're just like guessing, but like,
Yeah.
Yeah. I for context, I have not read much further
mhm.
in the manga. Although I've said before, it is complete.
Mhm.
But I do know a few things about like Izutsumi's backstory. I know a few things about Thistle's backstory and what happens to Thistle in the future.
Mhm.
So but I still think I haven't learned too much about like motivations of the elves and all that
Mhm.
stuff. So I don't know.
Be nice if we got to learn a little more about the dwarves.
Mhm.
We got a little
Yeah.
bit about the elves, but we got nothing about the dwarves pretty much.
Yeah, we don't know too much about like dwarven society at large.
Mhm.
We know about the group of dwarves that Senshi came in with,
Mhm.
and we know, individual dwarves, Senshi and what's her name?
Namari.
Namari, yeah.
Mhm.
But we don't we don't know too much about actual like dwarven civilization.
Speaking of dwarves and mysteries and things we don't know, right?
Yeah,
Senshi. Something just occurred to me about Senshi.
yeah,
So we know Senshi came in as pretty much like a young child and has lived in the dungeon for 10 years. Senshi had to fight his way to get out of the dungeon, then realized he wasn't ready for life on the outside, so he went back in to live in the dungeon. Right? When we see him as a kid, he does not have an adamantium pan.
No, he does not.
It doesn't really have
And
much of anything.
right. And if he was living in the dungeon and he wasn't going to town, that means either he smithed the adamantium pan himself or he found an adamantium pan. And he has shown no like, he hasn't made any references to like any skill at like smithing or any like experience like dealing with these materials. And he's got a mithril cooking knife.
Yep.
So that means either there's somebody else in the dungeon that made those for him, or somewhere in the Golden Kingdom, someone had a.
I think some of the stuff probably came from his dwarven compatriots when he came in, because like he's wearing the helmet that his like old mentor guy was wearing.
For that guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, he didn't have. I don't think any of them had the pan.
Right.
I don't know where the pan came from.
Yeah.
Exactly. And like the thing is, from what we've seen of the Golden Kingdom, right? It's kind of like, it seems like it's kind of European focused, and that pan seems like a wok.
Yeah.
And like
maybe there were some Eastern dwarves.
Maybe, because it talks about there being dwarves there and them having the runes of the ancient dwarves for the dwarven cistern.
Right.
But yeah, that just occurred to me, like someone somewhere in that dungeon had made or left behind an adamantium pan and lid and a mithril chef's knife. And that's just real, like that just feels like the most bizarre loot.
It does. Well, they said, or I guess Senshi said, that he could get an idea where they were just by looking at the runes on those. So clearly, like we saw through his backstory, they'd been down there a bit, but clearly he wasn't, and he was the scout too. So he's obviously knows his way around that area pretty decently. I don't know. Did they discuss? Did they mention them as being? Yeah, they mentioned them as being dwarven ruins, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I guess that's an ancient dwarven area. Maybe he, having been living down there for 10 years, maybe we'll find out later that he, that's where he got it. I mean, it seems like the right area.
Yeah, that's true. Like it did mention that was that whenever they went in further into the castle. Actually, now that I think about it, they did mention that the castle was filled with dwarven technology that was left over from the war between the dwarves and the elves. So maybe there was like a alliance between the dwarves and the humans.
Maybe.
And dwarves and the tall men or something. But it just seemed really like, I don't know, it just like we were talking about things making sense, and that just kind of popped up in my head. It's kind of stuck out as like, I hope that gets explained at some point, because that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're getting, once the next season starts up, we're gonna get them getting off the lift into the deeper parts of the dungeon.
Now,
and we might get some more history there.
Did they? I don't know if they've mentioned this, but at any point did they mention, oh, this was the furthest down anyone's ever been?
They did mention that door that they got to was the furthest anyone had been, and no one knew how to open the door.
So where's the loot?
That's a good question. Well, that is a good question. If nobody's been down there, why is there not? I guess the monsters might have cleared it away.
It's something that occurred to me a little earlier, because I was thinking, you were mentioning how, like, that's like a gold rush town. They all get completely, like, cleaned out. But that's as further down than anyone else has ever been, as far as they know. So
right,
there's nothing down there yet.
Speaking of going further than anyone else, something just occurred to me, right? We talked earlier about the sword, Kensuke, being a sword that only Laios would have been the one to wield because it's a monster sword, right? They get to that door that no one knows how to open,
Kensuke.
and Kensuke opens it.
I like that. That was neat. Kind of freaky also because they're like, wow, Kensuke can do all that. That's kind of... I guess him and Laios really are cool because otherwise that'd be a problem.
Yeah, they just find the door and they have to give up and go back.
And that would suck. Just getting down there and being like, okay, so where's the key?
Because their original mission that they were on, they said when they first fought the Red Dragon, was they were supposed to come down there and get a drawing of the door and record everything they can of like what they see, what it looks like, and everything to bring to the Island Lord, so some people can try to solve the puzzle and figure out how to open the door.
Right. And it turns out they just needed a sword.
They just needed Kensuke.
They just needed a specific sword
that was being wielded not by any old living armor, by the boss living armor that was protecting the egg sac.
Yeah.
I doubt anyone would have figured it out because they would have just knocked down the armor and left.
Yeah.
Assuming they made it through the army of living armors.
Yep. And if you make it past that, it's kind of like, okay. And not to mention the amount of supplies you would need to get down that far if you're not eating monsters.
Yes. It is. It's actually mind-boggling.
They have eaten so much.
Yeah, it's wild that anybody was able to make it down that far without eating the monsters.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to have like a whole mule like packed up or something with a bunch of food on it behind you.
Or do one of those things with like some kind of like compressed food pellets.
Ugh.
Oh, yeah.
You know what? Didn't they have something like that? One of the other groups? I seem to remember some sort of thing like that.
I think Shuro's party had some kind of like nutrition pellets that were like that they ate instead of meals if they were on the go and they weren't stopping to do stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Because the one lady that was cooking for him and made a big deal out of it was like, he needs to eat. He needs to have a real hot meal.
He needs to eat real food and not just the ration pellets.
Exactly. So those do exist.
Yeah.
Still, though, that wouldn't be pleasant.
No.
I guess if we're treating it like a gold rush town and they all end up like Senshi's, for lack of a better word, adopted family, where they get sort of like, like, oh man, they got that look in their eyes, they're going crazy because the greed is coming out or something.
Mm-hmm.
Then I guess food pellets would be able to sustain you because you wouldn't be much caring about it.
You'd be consumed by the gold rush.
I'm imagining like literal like animal food, just pellets.
Mm-hmm.
Bachelor Chow from Futurama.
There you go. Thompson's teeth.
All right. Well, we've been going for about an hour now.
Mm-hmm.
Final thoughts. We're probably not going to come back to Dungeon Meshi for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Since I want to wait for most of the second season to be out before we start this up again. So, thoughts? Anything you want to see in season 2?
I think the one thing I want is probably the one thing we're not going to get in season 2. I want them to save Fallon, and I want Fallon to join their party and adventure with them and eat all kinds of cool food with them. Because they've had all this build up about rescuing Fallon, all this stuff about the relationship between how Fallon connects to all of the party members. Well, except for like the only one that doesn't really have a connection to Fallon is Chilchok that we've seen, right? Like Fallon is Laios' sister. Fallon is Marcel's best friend / possible love interest.
Fallon
and
Shoro's love interest.
Right, Fallon was Shuro's love interest. Namari, we don't see We don't know too much about Namari, but they've had all this build up of like Fallon being this great character that like cares so much about other people and was really cool with eating the dungeon food, right?
Right.
And I think it'd be really cool to see, after spending so long building her up, to get the payoff of seeing them. Like, I don't want it to be a thing. It might end up being this way, but I don't want it to be a thing where like the last chapter is they revive Fallon and then they all lived happily ever after and we never see them interacting. I would like to see them take on the Mad Mage or take on these challenges or find new things to hunt and cook with Fallon.
Yeah.
If they rescue Fallon and then finish off by defeating the Bad Mage and assumingly Laios becoming the dungeon ruler guy, then that would make a more satisfying ending for sure than just we rescue Fallon, all right, bye.
Mm-hmm.
Which I guess that would all
Yeah.
come part and parcel, but you know what I mean. Have the Fallon thing come earlier than defeating the Bad Mage. And what I'd like to see is just I'd like to learn more about the lore. You know, learn about the world a little bit. Why are these elf guys so evil seeming and like have JoJo music behind them when they're coming down the stairs? You know, what's
Yeah.
going on there? And where are all the dwarves?
I would hope that we get more stuff about the elves, because I know at least a couple people on Tumblr who are like absolutely obsessed with one of the elves, and it's like, are you just obsessed with how she looks in that one scene?
Or is there more lore somewhere?
or is there more lore in the manga that I haven't read to yet?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I gotta make that my background or something on my phone or something. Coming down the stairs in their freeze frames. I love
Yeah.
that. That was just perfect. Like that was a perfect little artistic freeze frame. I love that.
Well, I'm pretty sure that's just straight like a full panel from the manga.
I wouldn't doubt it.
Mm-hmm.
They do that with Berserk a lot, where they got like I don't know if either of you really spent any time in that, but there's this scene where they're both Griffith and Guts are gonna duel on a hilly snowtop, and they show it like with the sun in the background, and that's just a panel from the manga, and it's in every
Yeah.
iteration of the anime, including like movies and such.
Yeah, that's when Izutsumi is undressing in the sauna, and it like pans up as she's like taking her pants off, and she's saying like, "Oh, who would want to see a beast naked?" That's straight up just a full panel from the manga as well, of her just like the full body covered in fur, just the speech bubble saying like, "Oh, who would want to see me naked?"
I love in the anime where like, sorry, I didn't mean to cut off, but like where you have that, and then it cuts to Laios.
Yeah,
And they're all holding Laios back and blindfolding him.
yeah.
And he's like, you gotta tell me, like, how many nipples is it?
Oh my god, yeah. That before, like in that moment, I was like, oh, okay, typical anime stuff. And then he said, how many nipples do they have? And I was like, oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah, he doesn't. He doesn't want to see her naked for sexual reasons. He wants to see her naked for scientific reasons.
I love that. Yeah, that made me laugh. I remember that.
But there's, speaking of which, there's also like a side story from the manga where it shows like the process of determining sleeping arrangements with Izutsumi, and it says that like Izutsumi sleeps on top of Chilchuk, and eventually he got tired of it and said like, go sleep with somebody else. He tried she tried to sleep on top of Senshi, but he's like rock hard and not comfortable. So she went and slept with Marcel, but she had bad dreams because of Marcel's like magic seeping off of her. And she tried to sleep with Laios, and Laios started like being real weird and touchy. And so immediately, like the first night, Chilchuk was like, "No, I am a girl dad. Fine, you can sleep with me." And so Izitsumi sleeps on top of Chilchuk.
What a life they live.
All right. Anyway, Orion, plugs?
So I can be found on YouTube and Twitch at Orian Senshi, OrianSenshi. I do streams of a variety of content, primarily gaming streams and writing streams. I also do game development streams and TTRPG related streams and OC creation streams and all kinds of stuff, and brainstorming streams for story ideas. Most of my kind of bread and butter right now is my writing streams. I stream Mondays and Fridays starting at 8:30 p.m. EST. The first Friday of the month, I do a collab stream with some of my friends playing Raft. That's normally on my friend's channel a little earlier in the day. I post about that on my on Twitter or X, which is where you could find me, Orion Senshi, on Twitter or X, and I'm also on Blue Sky Social.
Chris, can people find you ever? Couldn't come up with anything creative. All right, and this is my channel, so that's where you can find me. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.